Good morning, Anahi.
Good morning, Dan.
You are not matching my energy at all, but that's all right. I get it. What are we
Sorry,
chatting about this
sorry.
week?
Today we're going to talk about how school year impacts family finances, grants versus scholarships, and then private versus federal student loans. So, kind of going off of the first week of school vibes.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. Ah, yes, it is in fact the first week of school. Do you know how I know it's the first week of school?
How?
Because I live across the street from an elementary school, and for 8 months out of the year, I can't get out of my driveway.
Ooh, that's horrible. That's also how I didn't pass my first driver's license because I went 21 on a 20 speed limit zone. So, fun times
You're
for
a hard,
you.
you're a hardened criminal, and how dare you?
My bad.
Oh goodness. All right, school year impacting family finances. Shoot, let's talk about it.
Yeah. So with school starting back up, I thought it would be a good time to talk about how coming back to school impacts like family finances. I know when we talk about education, a lot of people immediately go to thinking about college, but I think it's important to think about the impacts that it has on younger families for students who go are still in school from K to 12. A lot of those finances hit hard around this time. So maybe last week for the people who wait a little bit till last minute to do all the spending, like the school supplies, back to school clothes, all the backpacks, all the fun stuff. Remember, that was my favorite time of the year. So I wanted to touch on that. I don't think that's something that we talk a lot with clients or at least meetings that I've been part of. So kind of wanted to know a little bit more how younger families go about planning this time of year.
Yeah. I want to give some high level data points for people to chew on a little bit, which is the average child is going to cost a household about $11,000 a year. And that's food, that's clothing, that's entertainment, that's gifts, that's birthdays, travel, all of it. But every kid is going to cost a household about $11,000 a year on a national average basis. You can add another in Boulder County in particular, you can add another 20 to 30,000 in childcare for the first 5 years or so. And then you might still have some childcare for like before or after school programs, even into K through 6 or something like that. But all that to say, kids are expensive. The lifetime
Yeah.
opportunity cost of having a kid without paying for college ends up being about $350,000. So $11,000. And then if you hadn't spent that $11,000, all of that. So I give that overarching theme to say a lot of the times for us as financial planners, we don't get into the nitty gritty of school season because it's baked into these bigger aggregate, you have kids, they cost you money type numbers.
Yeah, kids are expensive. I think that's one of the first shocks that I got when I first started here, just seeing how expensive daycare is and all of those expenses. I can see how those little small expenses are baked into the 11,000 and the bigger amount that you mentioned. I think something else that is interesting that I wanted to touch on, I saw this in the news, which is why I chose this topic, but I saw that parents around this time go through the route of buy now, pay later, and it's taking them into more debt, and some parents would rather accumulate more debt than saying no to their kids. So, what is some advice that you would give parents that are choosing this route and alternatives that they could do instead?
I think there's a big element in this conversation about financial privilege, right? If I'm a household that's making $300,000 a year, I'm probably not telling my kids no that often. I might not buy them like a brand new Lexus when they turn 16 or something, but when it comes to I want the Transformers backpack or I want the K-pop Demon Hunters lunchbox, like I'm probably not getting into that argument too much with my kids. Whereas if I'm a household making the area median income, which is about 70, $80,000 a year, we're having more trade-off conversations. We're probably saying something in the spirit of we can't afford that or that's not in the budget more often. I think one of the key things in regards to how parents want to plan for the minutia of education for their kids is really breaking in needs versus wants, right? So you get like the school list from the school, you need this many trapper keepers and pencils and pens and markers and stuff like that. That sort of goes into the needs category for a lot of households who can't really avoid that. The bigger thing that I think ends up costing a lot of families money that they were not budgeting for or planning on is the ad hoc de minimis costs. And what I mean by that is you'll have little things like a field trip. Oh, we're going to take a field trip to the museum. We need a permission slip and $20 to pay for admission. That's $20. It's not a lot of money, but to some people, it's a lot of money. And then on top of that, hey, my kid wants to play in a sport. There's a sign up fee of $199, and you got to buy them football pads and cleats and special socks and a uniform. That's going to be another $600. So yeah, there's different things like that that I think families need to think about their child's kind of overall life experience and education and budget according to the priorities they want to support. I think given unlimited money, we would want our kids to experience all the enriching activities and have all the things they want. But I think from a financial planning standpoint, it's meaningful to ask the question about what is the return on investment from this experience. So I'll give you an example. My parents were very supportive of anything I wanted to do in the spirit where of like I said, I want to learn a martial art. And they're like, here you go, here's Aikido. You can do Aikido. And then at another time, I was like, "Hey, I want to learn an instrument." They're like, "You can learn piano." And then later, I was like, "I want to learn violin." Like, "You can learn violin." But what they were not good at was saying, "You have to stick with it." And so they were really good at letting me do it as long as I stayed interested, and then letting me quit the day that I decided on an off mood that I wasn't going to do it, or playing violin until I just didn't practice one day and they never made me do it. I think it's meaningful for parents to look at the costs they incur for their kids, whether it's for educational stuff, science stuff, sports stuff, whatever it is, and ask the question, right? If we make this commitment one time, are we willing to do that as an experiment? And then if our kid wants to stick with it, what are the longer term costs we're signing ourselves up for? And what are our rules going to be regarding whether this kid needs to stick with it versus letting them quit? And are we going to let that decision be driven for us based on good parenting, i.e., is this kid making good decisions themselves? Are they being emotional in wanting to do something or quit something? Or are we letting finances decide this? Hey, I'd love it if my kid had no interest and didn't do anything because it would be cheaper and more affordable for me. So I think those are some of the balancing tests parents are faced with their kids. And I think going into the decision making framework with a financial boundary in mind is an important part of that because you can help teach your kids, particularly not so much in kindergarten, but when they get kind of getting into fourth grade, fifth grade, we can teach our kids about trade offs and making decisions based on financial considerations, not just because I want to decisions.
Yeah, going forward with that extracurricular activities, that was my next question. So, what is a good way to go about spending for extracurricular activities? Like, for example, my cousin just started cheer, and this is her sophomore year. And the respectfully, okay, with all the respect, I feel like the only reason that she is wanting to do cheer is so that she sticks with the group of friends that she has. So I feel like at this age, at the age of high school, it's very easy to get influenced by the people that you surround yourself with. Um, so what like for example, like you do want your kid to be happy, obviously, and want to keep your son or child to keep their friends and be happy and do the things that they want to do. But when it like solely like becomes like I want to do this certain thing just so that I can keep my friends or stay close with my friends, or I guess quote unquote fit in, how do you go like about telling your kids, yeah, you can do that, but the budget is going to be tight? So how would you work around that, or how would you like, what would the plan of action be there where it's like maybe it's not something that they wanna do long term, like you said, like a return on investment. It's not something that she wants to do in college or something that she wants to keep doing moving forward, but what would be something that you would suggest in that case?
I think there's a distinction here between pointing out, hey, like if you don't plan to be a professional cheerleader, professional dancer, professional track runner, et cetera, that at a certain point, these costs become unreasonable. The thing I always think about is like travel baseball. Travel, like going and playing Little League is not that expensive. It still costs money, but it's not crazy. But there's a big difference between playing Little League when you're a kid and being part of a travel baseball team, right? Where we're talking about a difference of hundreds versus thousands of dollars. I think in terms of something like the option of going through something like cheer and saying, well, I want to do that, but it's not cheap, just comes back to the core question. Was it in the budget in the first place, right? Is it something this family could afford in the first place? And then If it can't afford it right now, is there something that can be exchanged? Hey, you've been taking piano lessons for the last 2 years. Now you want to do cheer. So let me ask you, do you want to keep playing piano or do you want to do cheer? So it can be a trade offs conversation if money is a limiting factor. I think it's also important to get buy in from kids, right? Kids do not develop discernment or judgment until later on. And even high schoolers and teenagers are not known for their great judgment. But in that context, for parents and from a financial standpoint, it's helpful to say, here's what we as a family have decided we're going to spend on our child or our children, each collectively, right? And so here's what is affordable. And I think it's also very important to keep in mind the equitability of the distinction between different kids. If one of your kids is into chess, chess is one of the cheapest hobbies in the universe because you buy a chessboard and that's the end of it. Maybe you get a chess clock or take some lessons, but you just play a lot of chess and chess is not very expensive versus, hey, I want to get into dirt bikes. Okay, even a cheap dirt bike is minimum $1,000-ish, if not several $1,000s. And so if one of my kids is playing chess, one of my kids is into dirt bikes, that's going to feel unfair to them, even though both of their interests are satisfied with the amount of money we're willing to spend. So keeping in mind not only just the objective costs and the budget factors, but also the equitability between children and the perception of fairness between them, because what that can lead to sometimes is a case where even though both kids get to do what they want, you want to be mindful of the fact that one of them might grow to resent the other one because it feels like, even though it may not be true, it feels like the parents are favoritizing one over the other. So just being mindful as we think about trade-offs and considerations of what is or isn't affordable for a household, that we need to think about the pure economics. Can we afford it? If we can't afford it, what trade-offs can be made? And if there are trade-offs being made, do they come at the expense of somebody else? Are we shifting budget from kid A to kid B because kid A is cheap and kid B has more expensive tastes? We just need to be mindful of those trade-offs because we want to remember the theory of family financial socialization. Some of what our kids learn about money is taught deliberately. A lot of what they learn about money is observed. It's unintentional. It's from family, it's from parents, it's from peers. And so, if we do behaviors that seem contradictory to the lessons we want to teach, what our kids can learn from us is that we do not have a consistent framing of how we judge and make decisions about money, which teaches them inadvertently one of two lessons. And it's interesting because there's a question here about like why they would learn one versus the other, but can either teach them that we are unreliable in our money decisions and therefore they need to develop judgment and get really serious. And that can lead to money vigilance, money scarcity mindsets. Or vice versa, it can teach them money worship, that money is made up and there's no real point in thinking about it or taking it seriously because it's just arbitrary at the end of the day.
Take this with a grain of salt, but I think that this is a perfect time of the year to teach kids about money and telling them, I'm going to give you this amount, and then you are going to use this amount to buy the things that you need. And then if you have extra, then you can buy something else. And if you end up using your money for the things that you need and something else that you want, it teaches them that trade-off, which is something that I did with my little cousin. Her birthday was recently, so I told her that I would give her $100. I got her supplies, and I was like, "Okay, you have $30 left. You can get whatever you want." And it was interesting to see that, like, how she was working through the trade-offs and things that she could do as opposed to whatever she wanted right now. So I think that this is a good time to give kids a small budget or a way to experiment to see how they deal with money and kind of like a learning experience.
And I will say the biggest gift you gave her was not $100 in stuff and snacks. It was the opportunity to make decisions, probably with more money than she's ever had an opportunity to make decisions with. Like
Yeah.
I guarantee you created a core memory for her in how she thinks about money just by doing
Yeah,
that.
it was fun. It was like an experiment for me, like seeing what she would do with the money because she would see like a cool mechanical pencil or something like that. I was like, yeah, you can get one cool mechanical pencil or you can get 20. And then I was like, because knowing you, you're gonna lose this mechanical pencil in 2 days. So she started thinking about that and I was scaring her. What are you gonna do when you lose this pencil? Like, are you just gonna be the awkward student just chilling at the corner of the desk because you don't have a pencil? So it was fun to play around with her and see the things that she would choose to do as opposed to doing the things that she wanted to do. So that was a pretty fun experiment for me and experience for her, I would say.
And again, I think it's probably one of the most valuable things you've given her to date. So well done.
Yes. Okay, my next topic is more about college and starting to save for college and affording and paying tuition and stuff like that. So my next one is grants and scholarships. So I guess to start off this topic, what are the biggest differences between grants and scholarships?
Grants are typically needs based, government funded programs, although sometimes universities have a nonprofit arm or an endowment arm that does some grant stuff as well. But essentially, grants are sort of freebies based on need in most cases. So, for example, like the most classic example, this is a Pell Grant. If you are from an impoverished background as measured by the metrics in the FAFSA, you can receive free money for college. And then there are kind of subsidized grants where you can get something like a subsidized versus an unsubsidized Stafford loan. If you get a subsidized Stafford loan, that subsidy essentially pays the interest on the loan that you would otherwise be accumulating while you're in school. But because it is paid for, you just have to pay back the principal, not the interest. So it's a grant that is covering part, but not all of the costs. So grants, again, are just sort of like government sponsored, generally speaking, freebies. Scholarships tend to be merit based, although not always. Some scholarships are more mission oriented. So we'll talk about that in a second. But a traditional scholarship is merit based. It can be for sports, it can be for academic excellence, it can be from a competition, many different things that you can do to qualify for scholarships. A really critical element of scholarship qualification, most financial aid will come from the university itself, from its endowments, from its kind of scholarship financial aid office, where, hey, you got a 35 on your ACT, you're getting a free ride in undergrad, or you're getting your tuition paid for. All you got to do is come up with the money for room and board. So there's different things like that in the scholarship category. The other portion of scholarship categories then is merit based. Merit based, or not merit based, excuse me, is mission based. And mission based is often going to be like, let's say, a scholarship for female black engineers in the school because somebody maybe was 50 years ago the first black female engineer to go through the school. She did well in her career. She wants to endow the university with money to help more young black women go into this university and get the same education that she got. So you see a lot of those out there. The balancing test is that grants tend to be reasonably automatic, not always, but typically are going to be something where if your financials or your needs qualify for you, bam, they just sort of click into place. If you are on the side of scholarships, some scholarships are things that have been recruited for. We go back to the classic sports scholarship, but in other places, scholarships are things you have to compete for, apply for, or otherwise satisfy certain ongoing conditions for that may or may not apply on a going basis if you fail to meet those criteria.
With these two, I'll give an example, a personal example actually. When I went to college, I got a lot of different small scholarships, which I was very grateful for. I was happy I didn't have to pay for college itself because of all the scholarships that I had gotten. But the biggest shock that I got was when I did my taxes the year after my freshman year because some of the scholarships or grants that I was getting was being considered as taxable income. So that was a shock that I had, and I wanted to know if you could touch a little bit on that. What is considered taxable income? Should it have been considered taxable income, and how is that determined?
Sufficiently or succinctly, it depends on whether it is a gift being paid to you that you then have discretion over, or if it is a gift being paid to the university that does not have discretion. It's a complicated area, but I think a very easy way to summarize it is many grants and scholarships are paid directly, like from a nonprofit or from an endowment to the university for tuition. And there's essentially an unlimited gift exemption for paying for university costs. So if grandma and grandpa are rich and they want to pay for your college, they can just pay for your college and they don't have to worry about gift tax issues or income issues or anything like that. That doesn't quite exist in the category of third party payments where it's not grandma and grandpa giving you the scholarship, it's an organization or an association where there may be some eligibility qualification. So it's a complicated area, but I think the most common guideline you're going to see is that if payments are being made to a university, the likelihood that it's treated as income are much lower. If payments are being made to you, okay, it's a $5,000 merit scholarship, you can use it on tuition, room and board, whatever. That's much more likely to end up being classified as income, meaning that you may have a tax liability associated with that scholarship or that grant you've received.
So I know that I've worked with a lot of students throughout the year, helping them fill out FAFSA. And the question that I always get is what is going to determine the amount that I am getting for the grant that I will be receiving for help for college? And it, like you mentioned, it's need based. But what do things like FAFSA and just the financial aid offices use to determine what a family can qualify for?
The primary element here is going to be on the asset side of things, that if your family has $20 million lying around, that is going to become an issue where essentially that is expected to be used. So there are formulas based on how much of your family's income they have, how much assets they have, and there's essentially an expectation in the FAFSA calculations that some of their income or some of their assets will be used for college. Certain things can get carved out. So, for example, even though you have to report balances of college savings plans, those are typically excluded because the idea here is we shouldn't punish your ability to qualify for aid because we were responsible for saving for your college. But for example, let's say grandma and grandpa say, "Congratulations on graduating high school. We're going to give you $10,000." If they give you the student $10,000 as opposed to holding on to the $10,000 and being ready to deploy it for your benefit, reporting that $10,000 in the FAFSA as an asset you, the student, own severely impacts your eligibility for needs based support because it's considered largely available to pay for tuition, which realistically it is. So there's some kind of push pull games you can play with who actually holds money, who actually holds income. And one of the things here, sometimes families have this idea of, oh, my kid's going to get close to college age by the time I'm getting close to retirement. Maybe I'll just retire early. Keep in mind that the FAFSA and these tests have some kind of historically looking views where we go back in your income for the last couple of years. So it's not enough to just kind of quit your job before you start the FAFSA filing because you're going to go back a couple of years. You need to have been out of work or you need to have had low assets for a while. You can't just rapidly make yourself poor on paper and get past it.
Do you think that people who have money saved for college and have a good amount of money in saved for college, do you think people should still apply for FAFSA regardless, or do you think it's a waste of time? Do you think it's still worth people who think that won't qualify? Do you think it'll still be worth it for them to apply for FAFSA?
I think you have to be all but a billionaire to want to not fill out the FAFSA on the possibility that it's valuable because there's the automatic components of grants, financial aid, all of that sort of stuff. But even if you're from a well to do family and you're like, we're not going to get any real financial aid, we're not going to get any free money, you still use the FAFSA to qualify for quite a few programs and kind of features of the university. So things like the ability to take out unsubsidized Stafford loans instead of having to take out private student loans. Even families that make a decent income and have decent money can apply for certain better financing options for college if they haven't just saved up the money to pay for it out of pocket just by going through the FAFSA process. I will also say the FAFSA has gotten a lot easier in the last couple of years. They went through a big simplification process in the last couple of years. So it used to be more painful than it is today. But I would say, unless you have no handle on your finances whatsoever, the FAFSA probably takes 20 to 30 minutes to fill out. And honestly, it's not fun, but if you are a reasonably financially organized person, it's not that hard.
Yeah, it has. I can agree that it has gotten easier. I think the challenge that we were seeing last year is making corrections. So you can submit the application really quick in probably 20-30 minutes, but making the corrections if you do something wrong is what would take forever. So that's why a lot of people would go the other route where they would just say, we're probably not going to qualify for anything, so we're not even going to go through the process. Um, so that basically answers that question for grants versus scholarships. You touched on it, but I wanted to talk about private versus federal student loans. So once you know that you're still going to need more assistance in paying for college, what is the difference between those two now?
The primary reason we want to look at federal student loans versus private student loans are a couple of things. Number one, we tend to see preferable interest rates because the government has better security in its loans than private lenders. The second reason is because all of the federal forgiveness rules can apply to federal loans where they may not apply in the case of private loans. One of the tricky things about private loans is that many private loans are not classified as student loans, they're classified as personal loans. Personal loans do not enjoy some of the same forgiveness conditions that federal loans will by default for student debt. So, for example, if you go through public service loan forgiveness, PSLF, by working in a nonprofit or a school or a hospital or those sorts of things, that may apply only to your federal loans if you have private loans. The same mistake also can occur when people do loan consolidation, because loan consolidation often means taking your forgivable federal loans and consolidating them into a private loan that is not forgivable.
I haven't really had to go through the process of a student loan. Could you explain what it means to have does the student itself just apply directly to the loan by themselves, or does a parent also have to co-sign, and what risk does that cause for the parent if they have to co-sign?
A lot of private loans, and bear in mind, there's sort of a hybrid category, which is plus loans, which are essentially parentally signed student loans that still fall under the federal umbrella, but we're on the line between public federal loans and private loans. There's also another category, which we're not touching on too much here, which is some states have state backed student loan programs. Those do not enjoy the same forgiveness rule as federal loans. Those are a state by state thing, so I'm not going to get too much into them here. But in case of the question that you asked about whether private loans and or co-signing loans for a parent is a potential risk, it's the same risk you have co-signing anything. Your kid can, no, with no offense, parents, no offense, kids here, but your kid can turn out to be kind of shitty and not be able to pay back their student loans or not get a job, or maybe they develop a substance abuse issue, or maybe through no fault of their own they have a health condition or they get into an accident or something like that where now they can't work. So it's different when the student is the sole signer or sole holder of the loans, because those loans are somewhat collateralized by their earning potential. If you are fully disabled, if you are incapable of working, or if you're just not making very much money, you may not have to make any payments on your loans. You could even have those loans potentially forgiven if you have a lifetime disability that's going to prevent you from leveraging the human capital. But when mom and dad co sign, it's based on both the child's human capital and the parent's human capital. So there are cases where parents have co-signed loans for their kids and ended up with tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt that the kid isn't going to pay back, but because the parents make a decent living, the parents are making enormous payments on. So it's not to say that you shouldn't co-sign as a parent, but I do think it brings into focus a conversation we've had on this podcast many times, which is the return on investment from an education. I would say, parents, you're probably okay to co-sign your kids' student loans for a science degree, or somebody, yeah, they want to study political science, they want to work in government, or they are a military science student, they're going to become an officer in the military, or they want to study computer science, they want to become a programmer, an engineer, or they're going to MIT, Harvard Law. Those are areas where I'd say you're probably reasonably safe in the bet of co-signing. But if your kid says, I want to be an undeclared major, but I'm thinking about studying dance theory at a private university that costs $70,000 a year, and I don't actually want to work in dance theory, I just think it's neat, I would not be in a hurry to co sign that loan because the return on investment is not likely to be very good. And you, the parent, may end up paying off a loan that your kid never is required to because their earnings are low or because they never actually clear certain thresholds.
If it's like a car loan, for example, when you have a cosigner, it usually lowers the interest rate. Is that kind of the same case for this type of loan as well? I'm guessing yes.
It's not so much about the interest rate so much as whether they'll give you the loan in the first place. Because
Oh,
it's the
okay.
same thing with apartments or housing for young people. The basic question a lender has is, how's your credit? And when you're 18, you don't have any credit, or you're very unlikely to have any credit. And so you look like a terrible underwriting risk because there's no data on you. And also, by the way, you're telling the lender, my objective with this loan is to spend the money and not make any money that I'll pay you back with for a while, but I'll pay you back someday when I get out of school. From a lending standpoint, that's not a very good bet. So the co signing is often required by lenders to get the loan at all, not just about the interest rate. Are there some lenders who might lend to an emancipated minor who has separated from their parents due to some legal issues or family issues and say, okay, we get it, you don't have a parent who can co-sign, we will lend to you, but we will charge you more interest? That's possible. But co-signing most of the time is about the lender saying, we would not lend to you if there was not a more mature, better off adult to also sign on this potential risk for us.
Oh, okay. Okay. I see. And then I think you briefly touched on it, but could you talk a little bit more about the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized federal loans?
Very simply, if it's subsidized, you don't have to pay the interest, or the interest is being covered while you're in school, or sometimes even after you're out of school. If it's unsubsidized, typically the interest starts accruing immediately, but the interest rates are preferable. Stafford loans tend to have better interest rates than private student loans. So even if you can't pay for all of school with Stafford loans, or even if you don't get subsidized Stafford loans, they're still probably going to be better loans than a private loan. So it's still the first dollars you'd want to spend that were borrowed.
Okay. I'll definitely be using this as a reference point for when mentoring begins for people who are preparing to go to college. So this is all good information to know because it's not easy information to understand from like a first generation standpoint. So I think this is very helpful. And I think you also touched on loan forgiveness. So when does that happen? Is that just first out, or is that something that is going to happen for sure at a certain point with loans?
It depends, and I know everything in financial planning depends, but this is an area that used to be more complicated, and it's still complicated as a legacy, but it's currently a little bit simple for new borrowers because the federal government has gone through this push pull of loan forgiveness versus making loans more restrictive. Right now, the current program that you can borrow from or borrow under is pretty specific about how you repay it and what the conditions are for that. Historically, there used to be like different timelines based on different types of repayment programs, based on whether you're a public employee or a nonprofit employee versus a private employee. The basic brass tacks version of forgiveness today is this: there's essentially public service loan forgiveness, PSLF, where if you work for qualified government agencies, military, certain nonprofits, et cetera, school districts, you can find yourself making loan payments for 120 payments, 10 years, and then your loan will be forgiven tax free essentially. And that's the really nice version. Many other types of student loans may forgive after 10, 15, 20, or 25 years. There's a whole bunch of variables that go into what the timeline is, but essentially all on the premise that you made the requisite number of payments. So 120 payments for 10 years, 240 payments for 20 years, and so on. Those types of forgiveness from federal loans are taxable income. So it becomes an interesting planning strategy where there's a world where you're not going to make very much money or enough money, let's say, that your plan for your student loans is to be forgiven at some point. But what you have to do is make your payments the whole time and also be saving up the money in order to pay the tax bill that comes with forgiveness because the balance of the forgiven loans will be treated as taxable income in the year that they are forgiven, and vice versa by extension from all of this. There is a environment in which your student loans may never be forgiven if they are more private loans. If you've refinanced them, there's a whole bunch of things you can do to reset the clock or otherwise make them non-forgivable. And in that case, if we're higher earners, if we're making big payments, whatever it is, it may make sense for us to pay off the loans as aggressively as we can. So it really depends, but there's a donut hole here where on one side you're going for forgiveness and then you need to plan for the tax ramifications. On the other side, you're going to have to pay it off, in which case refinancing or paying it down really aggressively can be good strategies because it's just like any other debt. You're just trying to get it to zero as expeditiously and efficiently as possible.
And I'm guessing like any other loan, there's always going to be like the advertisements where you can refinance that loan and shift it over to a different loan. At what point does that make sense if the forgiveness is still a long way out?
Be careful because refinancing many times can disqualify your forgiveness eligibility, which puts you
Oh.
from a case of my strategy was to make minimum payments and one day it'll go away, and puts you into the strategy of I've got to get it paid off. That's where when people talk about the cost of college, don't get me wrong, some students have ludicrous student loan debt that just makes no sense. I am a huge critic of how student loans work in this country. We could have a whole separate conversation about that sometime. But the key thing that I try to point out to people is going to college is a decision you make to increase your human capital, where you hopefully get a combination of work you enjoy that also pays you well or pays you better than you could have gotten without the education, and in return, what it can often translate to for people is a increased tax rate, quote unquote, which is just you paying your student loans, but a tax rate of anywhere from 1 to 20% higher taxes. So to make that math really easy, if I could make $50,000 without going to college, or I could make $100,000 going to college, then my student loans could end up costing me going to college anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000 a year, but I'm still better off. But if my human capital potential before and after college was, let's say, 50,000 versus 55,000, going to college may not make any sense for me because I may end up with a higher tax rate effectively based on my student loans because of the forced repayment mechanisms, where now I have to pay it off. Somebody who is in the know about this is going to point out that there are some exemptions for lower income and things like that. I'm just trying to make the math point clear here by using these examples and these numbers. So don't at me or send me an email later being like, actually, this portion of your income wouldn't count. Leave it alone. We're just trying to make the math clear. But that's where the refinancing question comes in here is if I'm in a
Mhm.
position where I'm never going to get forgiveness based on my income level, where I'm going to be making payments big enough that the loan will get paid off at some point, then I may want to go ahead and refinance in order to reduce my cost of interest and make it faster to pay off.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. I think that's something that's really important for somebody to want to consider before seeing the shiny, sparkly, lower interest new loan and trying to refinance something like that and completely disregarding or shifting away from the benefits that you could have gotten of just staying within that loan that you are already in. So I think this is something that's really important to consider. That basically answers all of my questions that I had in light of school starting again. And so thank you for that. This will definitely be a podcast that I share with the students that I'm helping so that they're a little bit more aware of the things that they're going to walk into once they step foot in college.
Well, kids, listen to Anahi. She knows what she's talking about. So, with that said, what have you learned this week that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so this week I learned something pretty interesting that I thought it was pretty cool. I learned more about ERISA and some of the rules around employer retirement plans. A highly compensated employee is generally someone who owns more than 5% of the company and or earns over 160,000 a year subject to IRS rules and plan provisions. I thought it was interesting that if other employees aren't participating or contributing in enough to a 401k, it can actually affect how much the highly compensated employees or owners are able to contribute to theirs. So this is due to an annual non-discrimination testing designed to ensure that plans do not benefit higher earners any more than it should. And then we also touched on a safe harbor plan and how it can help as the employer agrees to make certain contributions for their employees. So having a required match or a contribution that they have to make in that plan to their plan, and it can automatically pass annual discrimination testing.
And I want to be really clear here because the word discrimination is super loaded in the English language. Discrimination testing in a retirement plan context just there's two classes of employees, non-highly compensated employees and highly compensated employees. And all discrimination testing means in that category is just that the plan doesn't benefit the highly compensated employees too much more than the non-highly compensated employees. That way it's a retirement plan for everybody in the company, not just for the executives or the owners.
Yes, discrimination is not a bad word in these terms.
We'll say it could be, but that's more of a like workers versus management, viva la revolution sort of conversation.
Exactly.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.